November 2nd, 1968, Duke Lap Special Forces Camp, Vietnam. The night air carried the acrid scent of cordite and fear. Captain Michael Davis pressed himself against the sandbag wall of the command bunker, sweat running down his face despite the relative coolness of the night. The radio crackled with desperate transmissions as his team of 12 Green Berets and 40 Montagnard tribesmen fought to hold back over 600 North Vietnamese Army regulars who had surrounded their remote outpost near the Cambodian border. "Perimeter breach! Sector 4! They're coming through the wire!" The voice of his team sergeant carried over the chaos of automatic weapons fire and the hollow thumps of mortar rounds impacting around the camp. Davis keyed his radio mic, his voice steady, despite the knowledge that his position would be overrun within minutes. "Spooky 41, this is Duke Lap Actual. We are taking heavy casualties. Request immediate fire support. Danger close. I repeat, danger close." The radio hissed with static for 3 eternal seconds before a calm southern drawl responded. "Duke Lap Actual, Spooky 41. We copy danger close. Marking our position with flare now. Hold tight." Davis watched as a bright magnesium flare drifted lazily through the night sky above the camp, casting harsh shadows across the battleground. Then he heard it, the distinctive drone of a C-47 transport plane, modified into something the NVA had learned to fear more than any other American weapon in Vietnam. The aircraft appeared as a dark silhouette against the star-filled sky, banking in a lazy left turn that positioned it parallel to the eastern perimeter where NVA troops had breached the defensive wire. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the night transformed. From the left side of the aircraft, a solid stream of red tracers poured downward, like water from a garden hose, except this hose spat out 6,000 rounds per minute from each of its 3 7.62mm miniguns. The sound reached the camp a moment later. Not the familiar staccato of conventional machine guns, but a terrifying mechanical buzz that soldiers called the electric chainsaw of death. The effect on the massed NVA troops was catastrophic. The minigun's fire, precisely aimed in a tight oval pattern from the circling aircraft, cut through the attacking force with mathematical precision. Each minigun put a bullet into every square foot of a football field-sized area every second. No human could survive such concentrated firepower. "My God," whispered Davis's radio man. "It looks like a dragon breathing fire!" Davis understood why they called it Puff the Magic Dragon. The deadly aircraft continued its orbit around the camp, the pilot maintaining a perfect circle while the gunners poured devastating fire onto the enemy positions. Within minutes, the NVA attack had disintegrated, survivors fleeing back into the jungle as the gunship continued its relentless barrage. What Davis didn't know as he watched the aircraft that had saved his life was that it shouldn't have existed at all. The AC-47 gunship, the Spooky that appeared like an avenging angel above his position, was the product of one man's rejected idea, a concept deemed impossible and impractical by military experts just a few years earlier. The side-firing gunship concept had been repeatedly dismissed as tactically unsound, its mathematics questioned, its potential denied by the highest levels of the Air Force. Yet here it was, saving lives and changing the nature of close air support forever. The aircraft banked again, its engines droning steadily as it prepared for another pass. Inside that aircraft was more than a crew. It was the physical manifestation of one officer's stubborn refusal to abandon an idea he knew would work, despite official rejection. What began as a discarded experiment would save thousands of lives and fundamentally change aerial combat forever. And it all started with a simple question. What if an aircraft could fire from its side while orbiting a target, rather than making straight, fleeting passes? 1945. Eglin Field, Florida. Second Lieutenant Ronald Terry's boots crunched on the tarmac as he walked away from his P-47 Thunderbolt, the massive radial engine still ticking as it cooled in the humid Florida air. At 23, Terry had arrived too late to see combat in the Pacific, the Japanese surrender coming just weeks after he'd completed his fighter training. Instead of hunting Zeros over Tokyo, He now tested aircraft modifications and tactics at Eglin, running endless drills and writing reports that seemed destined for filing cabinets rather than the history books. Terry pulled off his flight helmet and wiped sweat from his close-cropped brown hair. Something about today's gunnery exercise had bothered him. He'd executed a textbook strafing run against the ground target, diving at a 30-degree angle, guns blazing for the brief 4 seconds he had on target before having to pull up to avoid slamming into the Florida scrubland. 4 seconds. That's all fighter pilots got to deliver their payload before physics and survival instinct forced them to break off. "Good run, Terry," called his squadron commander, walking over with a clipboard. "Tight pattern, right on target." "Thank you, sir," Terry replied, still staring at the distant target. "But I've been thinking, 4 seconds isn't much time on target." "It's all you get unless you want to become one with the landscape," the commander laughed. "That's why we train. Make those seconds count." Later that night in the officers' club, Terry sketched diagrams on a napkin while nursing a bourbon. A West Texas farm boy with an engineering degree from Texas A&M, Terry had always been fascinated by mechanical problems. Before the war, he'd redesigned irrigation systems on his family's cotton farm, improving water distribution by modifying standard equipment in ways the manufacturers hadn't considered. "What if we're thinking about this all wrong?" he muttered to himself, drawing an aircraft flying in a circular pattern rather than a straight line. "What if the guns fired from the side?" The mathematics began forming in his mind, a plane orbiting a fixed point, guns aimed perpendicular to the flight path, creating a continuous cone of fire rather than brief bursts. The physics were sound, but the concept ran counter to every established attack doctrine in the Air Force. Terry took his idea to his commanding officer the next day, only to receive a dismissive laugh. "Son, aircraft attack straight ahead because that's how aircraft are designed to attack. Always have been, always will be." Undeterred, Terry began conducting unofficial experiments. During training flights, he'd bank his aircraft to the left, imagining tracers streaming from the side rather than the nose. He calculated trajectories, lead patterns, and effective ranges. He studied the mechanics of the Browning M2 50 caliber machine guns, wondering if they could be repositioned to fire from a side-mounted position. When Terry left active duty in 1947, transitioning to the Air Force Reserve while pursuing a civilian career with the newly formed Air Force Systems Command as an engineering consultant, he took his concept with him. The idea remained lodged in his mind through the early 1950s, through marriage, the birth of 2 children, and various assignments working on conventional weapons systems. By 1960, Terry had risen to become a respected figure at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, his expertise in aircraft armament systems recognized throughout the Air Force. Still a major in the reserves, he continued refining his side-firing concept through mathematical models and theoretical papers. The Korean War had come and gone, reinforcing traditional close air support doctrine rather than challenging it. But Terry remained convinced that his approach could revolutionize ground attack capabilities. "Aircraft are limited not by their weapons but by their attack profile," he wrote in a proposal that gathered dust in Pentagon filing cabinets. "By changing how we deliver fire, we can increase time on target from seconds to minutes, and accuracy from acceptable to devastating." No one could have predicted that within 5 years, Terry's rejected concept would be transformed from an ignored theoretical paper into one of the most effective weapons of aerial warfare ever developed, or that thousands of American lives would be saved by what one general had dismissed as a farm boy's impossible fantasy. 1961 to 1963, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio. Major Ronald Terry sat in his small office at Air Force Systems Command, surrounded by stacks of technical manuals, ballistics tables, and hand-drawn diagrams. Now a full-time civilian engineer with the Air Force, while serving as a reserve officer, Terry had spent years refining his side-firing concept. The walls of his office displayed aerial photographs of ground targets with concentric circles overlaid, showing the theoretical pattern of fire from an aircraft orbiting at different altitudes and speeds. "The math doesn't lie," Terry explained to Captain James Wilson, a younger officer who had taken interest in his work. An aircraft flying in a pylon turn at 3,000 feet altitude, banking at 30 degrees, can maintain guns on a fixed target for minutes instead of seconds. Terry had developed detailed calculations for what he called orbital fire, a concept where an aircraft would circle a target while firing weapons mounted perpendicular to the direction of flight. His equations accounted for gravity, wind drift, angular momentum, and the ballistic properties of various ammunition types. The beauty of this approach, Terry continued, pointing to a diagram, is that you can put every round into an area the size of a football field, with no gaps in coverage. It creates a lethal cone of fire that nothing on the ground can escape. Despite his growing confidence in the concept, Terry faced an uphill battle with Air Force leadership. In early 1962, he formally submitted his proposal to the Air Force Tactical Air Command, requesting funds to modify a test aircraft with side-firing weapons. The response came 3 months later in a terse memo that Terry still kept in his desk drawer. Concept deemed impractical and tactically unsound. Aircraft are designed to fire forward for sound engineering and tactical reasons. Modification as proposed would compromise structural integrity and create unacceptable aerodynamic complications. Request for funding denied. Additional rejections followed from the Air Force Special Weapons Center, the Systems Engineering Group, and finally the Pentagon itself. A general scrawled across one proposal: aircraft fly forward and shoot forward. Nature of air combat hasn't changed since World War I, despite what this engineer thinks. But Terry refused to give up. During his lunch breaks and after hours, he continued refining his calculations, addressing each criticism in detail. He built scale models showing how guns could be mounted without compromising airframe integrity. He developed fire control systems that would account for the complex mathematics of orbital fire. "They keep saying it's impossible," Terry told his wife over dinner one night, "but they're thinking about the problem all wrong. They're stuck in old ways of fighting." By late 1963, Terry had nearly exhausted all official channels. His reputation as a skilled engineer kept him employed, but many colleagues viewed his side-firing fixation as an embarrassing obsession. Some called him Side-Fire Terry behind his back. Then came the escalation in Vietnam. Reports from military advisors described small, isolated special forces camps and Vietnamese outposts being overrun during night attacks. Conventional air support proved ineffective in these situations. Fast jets couldn't identify friendly positions from enemy forces in the dark, and their brief firing passes lacked the sustained firepower needed to break up determined ground assaults. Terry recognized an opportunity. In December 1963, he drafted a new proposal specifically addressing the tactical problems emerging in Southeast Asia. Instead of focusing on the theoretical advantages of his system, he emphasized practical solutions to immediate battlefield challenges. Current close air support doctrine fails under night attack conditions against dispersed infantry, he wrote. A side-firing weapon system employed from a slow-moving aircraft in a continuous orbit would provide sustained, accurate fire exactly where ground forces need it most. This time, someone was listening. As American involvement in Vietnam deepened, military leaders became more willing to consider unconventional approaches. Terry's proposal reached the desk of a forward-thinking general who saw potential where others had seen only impracticality. Within weeks, Terry received orders to report to Bien Hoa Air Base in Vietnam to implement what was now designated Project Gunship Y, the first official test of his long-rejected concept. 1964, 1965, Bien Hoa Air Base, Vietnam. The tarmac at Bien Hoa shimmered under the relentless Southeast Asian sun as Lieutenant Colonel Ronald Terry stepped off the transport plane. The air hung thick with humidity and the sweet rot stench of jungle vegetation. Terry carried little beyond his duffel bag and a briefcase containing 5 years of calculations and designs, papers that had been repeatedly stamped rejected until the desperation of war finally pried open closed minds. "Welcome to Vietnam, sir," greeted Captain John Simons, the Air Force Special Operations Liaison assigned to Terry's experimental project. Your aircraft arrived yesterday. It's not much to look at. Terry followed Simons to a hardstand where a weathered C-47 Skytrain sat in the sun. The aircraft, a military version of the venerable DC-3 commercial airliner, had been flying since World War II. Its twin radial engines and corrugated aluminum skin spoke of a different era of aviation. But for Terry's purposes, it was perfect. Slow, stable in turns, and plenty of room inside to mount the guns, Terry said, running his hand along the aircraft's fuselage. What about the weapons? 3 SUU-11AA miniguns arrived this morning, Simons replied. 6 barrels each, 7.62 meter, electrically driven at 6,000 rounds per minute, per gun. Terry nodded in satisfaction. The minigun, a modern evolution of the Gatling gun, represented a quantum leap in firepower. Each one could saturate an area with bullets at a rate that would require 10 conventional machine guns. 3 of them firing simultaneously would create the cone of destruction he had calculated in his Ohio office. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of modifications and improvisation. Local mechanics cut precise rectangular holes in the left side of the C-47's fuselage. Terry personally designed the mounting brackets for the miniguns, ensuring they were aligned at exactly the correct angle to compensate for the aircraft's bank during a pylon turn. He installed a rudimentary fire control system cobbled together from spare parts, allowing the pilot to trigger all 3 guns simultaneously. Inside the aircraft, they mounted flare launchers to illuminate targets at night and installed a basic sighting system. Initially nothing more than an aiming pole that the pilot would align with the target while establishing the correct orbit. The gun positions were reinforced to handle the tremendous recoil, and the electrical system modified to power the hungry miniguns. "It looks like something from a mad scientist's workshop," remarked Colonel James Haggerty, commander of the 4th Air Commando Squadron, as he inspected the completed modifications. "But I've read your calculations, Terry. If this works like you say, it will..." "It will, sir," Terry assured him. "The math doesn't lie." On December 15, 1964, the first operational test of Terry's concept occurred when the modified C-47, now bearing the call sign FC-47 for fire control, responded to a distress call from a Vietnamese outpost near Thanh Yen. The outpost was surrounded by Viet Cong forces and in danger of being overrun. Captain Gerald Atkins piloted the aircraft while Terry served as fire control officer. As they approached the target area, Terry felt the weight of the moment. 5 years of rejection and ridicule, countless hours of calculations and modifications, all would be validated or demolished in the next few minutes. "Beginning orbit at 3,000 feet, Atkins announced, banking the aircraft into a 30-degree left turn that would keep the guns trained on the target area. "Ready on guns." "Illumination first," Terry ordered, launching flares that floated down on small parachutes, bathing the battlefield in harsh white light. Through his binoculars, he could see VC troops swarming toward the outpost perimeter. "Fire," Terry commanded. The 3 miniguns erupted simultaneously, their combined fire creating a sound unlike anything previously heard in warfare. A mechanical buzz-saw noise that cut through the night. Red tracers poured from the side of the circling aircraft like water from a hose, stitching a tight pattern around the outpost perimeter. The effect on the ground was immediate and devastating. The concentrated fire shredded vegetation, collapsed simple structures, and cut down exposed enemy troops. The VC attack faltered, then collapsed entirely as the gunship continued its relentless orbit, pouring fire precisely where the defenders needed it most. When they landed back at Bien Hoa 3 hours later, a message awaited them from the outpost commander. "Attack broken. Estimate 300 enemy casualties. Please thank the angels who fly the dragon ship." Within weeks, the success of the first gunship led to the official creation of the AC-47 program. Terry's rejected concept had proven itself in the crucible of combat, and what began as one man's obsession was becoming an essential component of America's air power in Vietnam. 1966 and 1969, Southeast Asia. The AC-47 gunship, now officially codenamed Spooky, became a fixture in the night skies over Vietnam by early 1966. The 4th Air Commando Squadron operated an initial fleet of 20 aircraft, each one modified according to Terry's specifications. The nickname Puff the Magic Dragon spread among American ground forces, referencing both the popular Peter, Paul and Mary song and the mythical appearance of the aircraft's fire streaming from its side like a dragon's breath. Staff Sergeant James Rodriguez, a door gunner who flew over 60 missions on AC-47s, described the psychological impact of the gunship's arrival. When we showed up, you could feel the change over the radio. Guys who'd been whispering because they thought they were about to die would start whooping. "The dragon's here. We're gonna make it." Even the enemy knew what was coming. From the ground, the effect was both terrifying and beautiful. The gunship would establish its orbit at 3,000 feet, invisible in the night sky until it launched illumination flares. The aircraft itself remained hard to spot, but its fire appeared as a solid red line connecting heaven and earth, creating a wall of lead that moved with mathematical precision across the battlefield. By mid-1967, statistics demonstrated the program's staggering success. AC-47s had defended over 450 outposts and hamlets, firing over 6 million rounds of ammunition. In not a single case had a defended position been overrun while a gunship remained overhead. Pilots and crews began wearing unofficial patches showing a dragon with the motto, "We kill at night." The gunship concept's effectiveness spurred rapid evolution. The limited payload capacity of the aging C-47 airframe led to the development of the AC-119G Shadow and AC-119K Stinger, using the larger C-119 flying boxcar as a platform. These aircraft carried additional 20mm cannons alongside the miniguns, increasing both firepower and effective range. But the ultimate expression of Terry's concept emerged with the AC-130 Spectre gunship in 1968. Built on the C-130 Hercules tactical transport platform, the Spectre carried an unprecedented arsenal. 4 7.62mm miniguns, 4 20mm cannons, and eventually 40mm and 105mm howitzers, all firing from the left side of the aircraft. Advanced fire control systems, radar, and night vision equipment transformed Terry's improvised idea into one of the most sophisticated weapons platforms in the Air Force arsenal. Captain William Henderson, a ground controller with the 5th Special Forces Group, recalled a particularly dramatic rescue enabled by an AC-130 at Bu Prang in November 1969. "We had 400 NVA regulars hitting us from 3 directions. They'd brought heavy weapons, .51 caliber machine guns, mortars, the works. We were down to our last ammo, calling in our coordinates for friendly artillery to hit right on top of us if we were overrun." The AC-130 arrived just as NVA forces reached the perimeter wire. Its initial burst from the 20mm cannons created a temporary pause in the enemy advance. Then the gunship brought its 40mm Bofors cannon to bear, methodically destroying the heavy weapons positions that had been pinning down the defenders. The 40mm rounds hit with such force that they'd throw NVA soldiers through the air, Henderson continued. Then they brought the 105 online. Each round hit like a precise thunderbolt. The ground shook. When dawn came, we counted over 150 enemy dead and captured 3 who were in such shock they could barely speak. One kept saying the same phrase in Vietnamese. Our interpreter told us he was calling it the dragon that circles in the sky and never stops killing. The effectiveness of the gunships led to predictable enemy adaptation. The NVA and Viet Cong learned to time their attacks during periods of low cloud cover when gunships couldn't operate effectively. They developed better camouflage techniques to hide from illumination, and eventually deployed heavier anti-aircraft weapons specifically targeting the orbiting aircraft. Despite these countermeasures, the gunship concept Terry had developed proved remarkably resilient. By the end of 1969, official Air Force assessments credited gunships with saving over 10,000 American and Allied lives through their defensive actions at besieged outposts. Over 200 villages and hamlets that would have been overrun without gunship support remained under government control. Terry, now a full colonel, visited Vietnam periodically to observe operations and recommend improvements. During one such visit in late 1969, a grizzled sergeant approached him at the officers' club in Saigon. "Sir," the sergeant said, extending his hand, "I was at Duke Lap last year when your dragon saved our lives. The brass can reject whatever else you come up with, but for us grunts, you're the man who made sure we got home." 1970 present day. The gunship concept that began with Terry's rejected idea continued to evolve long after the Vietnam War ended. When American forces withdrew from Southeast Asia in 1973, the AC-130 gunship had become one of the most feared weapons in the US arsenal. Its development path never stopped, with each new generation incorporating advanced technology that Terry could scarcely have imagined in his Wright-Patterson office 2 decades earlier. The AC-130H Spectre gave way to the AC-130U Spooky II in the 1990s, which integrated computerized fire control systems, enhanced navigation capabilities, and sophisticated sensors that allowed the gunship to engage targets in any weather, day or night. The modern AC-130J Ghost Rider that entered service in 2017 represents the 4th generation of Terry's concept, featuring precision-guided munitions, laser-designated targeting, and digital systems that can track multiple targets simultaneously. Colonel James Madden, who commanded gunship operations during Operation Desert Storm in 1991, described their impact on Iraqi forces. When Saddam's Republican Guard encountered our gunships during their attempted breakout from Kuwait, the psychological effect was immediate. Entire mechanized columns simply stopped advancing. They knew what was happening even if they couldn't see the aircraft. The precise, relentless fire coming from an unseen platform overhead broke their will to fight. During the conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq that followed the September 11th attacks, gunships proved invaluable in close air support roles. Special operations teams operating in remote mountain valleys or urban environments relied on the gunship's ability to deliver precisely controlled firepower while distinguishing between enemy combatants and civilians or friendly forces. Master Sergeant Thomas Reynolds, a Delta Force operator who served in Afghanistan, explained, "In Tora Bora, in 2001, we were pursuing Al-Qaeda fighters through mountain passes at night. The AC-130 overhead was our guardian angel. The crew could see what we couldn't see, warn us of ambushes, and deliver fire so accurate they could hit a single vehicle without damaging buildings 10 meters away." Ronald Terry himself witnessed the evolution of his concept throughout his life. After retiring from the Air Force as a full colonel in 1976, he worked as a defense consultant, helping to refine gunship systems and tactics. He received the Distinguished Service Medal for his contributions, along with numerous other decorations that acknowledged what had once been his rejected obsession. In a rare interview given to Air Force magazine in 1997, Terry reflected on the irony of his success. The same officials who told me it was impossible later claimed they had supported the concept all along. That's how innovation works in large organizations. First they tell you you're crazy, then they tell you you're obvious. The gunship concept influenced broader military doctrine beyond the specific aircraft that embodied Terry's idea. The principles of persistent presence, precision fire, and orbital attack patterns became central to modern close air support thinking. Drone warfare, in particular, adopted many of the tactical approaches Terry had pioneered, using loitering platforms to provide sustained observation and precision strikes. By 2020, the fundamentals of Terry's side-firing concept had been incorporated into advanced weapons systems across multiple branches of the military. The Marines' KC-130J Harvest Hawk, the Army's Armed Aerial Scout Program, and various drone platforms all reflected aspects of Terry's original insight: that an aircraft could be more effective firing from orbit than from direct attack runs. Military historians now rank the gunship concept among the most significant tactical innovations of modern warfare. Dr. Eleanor Winters, professor of military history at the Air Force Academy, wrote, "The gunship represents one of those rare instances where a single individual's persistence fundamentally changed how wars are fought. Terry's concept was rejected because it contradicted conventional wisdom, yet it saved thousands of lives and continues to influence military aviation 60 years later." Ronald Terry passed away in 2008 at the age of 86, having lived long enough to see his rejected idea become not just accepted, but essential to American air power. At his funeral, an AC-130 performed a flyover in the missing man formation, a rare honor for someone who had never commanded a major unit or served as a general officer. The true measure of Terry's achievement lies not in the decorations he received or the recognition that eventually came his way, but in the thousands of American and Allied soldiers who returned home because a side-firing gunship arrived overhead at their moment of greatest peril. His legacy continues with each mission flown by modern gunships, aircraft that exist because one officer refused to accept rejection when he knew his calculations were right.